Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. The question that we are asking ourselves right now is, what can romance novels teach us about real life relationships? Yeah, this sounds like a really interesting topic, and I can't wait to see what all of our panelists have to say about it, or hear what all our panelists have to say about it. But before we do that, let's get started with introductions. I'm going to start with Alaina Erdell. She lives in Ohio with her partner and their crazy but adorable cats. Prior to being an author, she worked as a chef. And when she's not writing sapphic fiction, she enjoys painting, cooking for friends and family, experimenting with molecular gastronomy. That sounds maybe dangerous if I were doing it. Reading, kayaking, snorkeling, traveling, and spoiling her beloved nephews. Her newest release, All Things Beautiful, is out January 16th. Cathy Dunnell lives in the UK with her wife and daughter. Her third novel, Turning Point, is out on the 1st of February. When she's not writing, she enjoys being outside in all kinds of weather, cycling, walking, and playing sports. Elizabeth Bradshaw is a late-blooming queer millennial who spent most of her growing up years with fictional friends for company. She left Texas to settle down in the Midwest with her partner and her two cats, where she spends most of her evenings consuming snacks and discussing TV characters as if they're real people. Her novel, Good Christian Girls, comes out next month. Kelly and Tana Fireside have been friends since the first time people were listening to record albums and have been married to each other for going on 18 years. When they are not traveling across the US in their RV with an Australian shepherd named Gabby and her best friend Chip the cat, they split their time between homes in Tucson, Arizona and Sonora, Mexico. They love cooking, drinking good wine, bird watching, and making music around a campfire. They also love Bold Strokes Books, who last year published their first two romance novels, Vintage and Vogue, there it is, and Whiskey and Wine. Their third, Spirits and Sirens, will be released in April. All three books are set in the same small town in the mountains of southern Arizona and feature strong, smart, funny women who have interesting jobs, love their community and their friends, and get the happy endings they deserve. All right, Kris Bryant writes contemporary romance and erotica. She enjoys binge watching shows, snacking, and working with animal shelters around the world through her Patreon page. She is presently working on her, wait for it, 21st full-length novel with Bold Strokes Books. Ooh, boy. Her latest novel is Dreamer, which has a release day of this coming Tuesday. I know some of us may be dividing our time between the bookathon and the playoffs today. If you want to combine those interests, you should definitely check out Kris's novel Catch, which came out just about a year ago and is about a woman who becomes the offensive coordinator for a new NFL team called the Connecticut Cheetahs. Oh, Cheetahs. Woo-hoo. Okay, so that's our introductions done. Oh, by the way, I'm Nan Campbell. So we have these questions. We have this question of, what can romance novels teach us about real life relationships? So before we start, the chat roll is live for people who wish to comment while we are discussing this. Please put that you would like to show your comments to everyone in the chat roll so that your comment doesn't get lost in the shuffle. Also, if you have questions for us, which we would welcome, you can put them in the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of your screen. And if you haven't already, set your screen to gallery view so you can see all of us at one time. We're going to be all on the screen for the duration of the panel. All right, so first question can be a little personal. So here's the question. Has there ever been a time in your real life relationship when you took inspiration from a romance novel? And if that might be a little too personal for you, you can change it up a little bit and answer the question, is there something in a romance novel, perhaps one that you have written, that you think could enhance or improve a real life relationship? I hope that wasn't too convoluted. Basically, has it ever happened to you? Cathy, why don't we start with you? What do you think?
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting question. And I tend to think of it as I have tried sometimes when taking something from a romance novel, kind of romantic things that people do to each other or do for each other, I should say, in novels. And then I've sometimes attempted that in real life and it hasn't worked. I mean, I think often like cooking for your intended is meant to be terribly romantic, and that's always kind of like gone a little bit wrong. I've kind of like set popcorn bags on fire and stuff like that. Or when it has gone well, you've then just eaten a massive pile of food and then you just have to sit around like undoing the top button of your trousers, and that sort of seems to kill the romance. So I think the few times I've ever tried to apply something from a romance novel, it's just not really worked. So that's my lesson, is to not.
Okay, great. Thank you. How about you, Alaina?
I took kind of a generalized view of, what can we take from romance novels? And I think one of the things is, a lot of times in order for your novel to work well, you have to have your characters communicate. And I think that we can extend that into our real lives, because I know myself, I'm often not a great communicator. And it's a lot different when you have all sorts of time to put it on a page and tweak it and rework it. And when you're trying to communicate with somebody in real life, day to day, minute by minute, things can go wrong and you have to fix them in real time. And I think just seeing how characters work things out, and I try to do a little bit better at that. And then, on a kind of fun side, romances are showing, a fun part of meeting. And when characters are romancing each other, there's, there's spontaneity, and they're doing, nice little token things for each other. And I think we can take that into our real life too.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those things we can really bring into our own relationships. Elizabeth, how about you?
Yeah, I've definitely taken inspiration from fiction for real life quite a bit. I think maybe the biggest way is the impact the Notebook had on me. I was like, this is something I'm definitely gonna do. I'm gonna keep a notebook of my romantic life so that when we get old, I can read it back and have all these memories. And that's also a very kind of writery thing to do, I think. So I do have that, and with my current partner, and I'm excited to fill it up with good memories and kind of memorialize that in written form.
That's really awesome. So can I ask you, how much have you written in this notebook, or are you on like the 16th notebook right now?
I'm still on the first one because I tried to save like kind of significant moments in the relationship or in the world, and then write those down. And I save, things like movie ticket receipts and fortune cookie things and kind of put those in there. So it's a nice little scrapbook. I'm about, I would say, 2/3 of the way through a Moleskine notebook right now.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's a great idea.
Thanks.
Kelly and Tana, how about you? Any inspiration happening?
So we sort of talked over these questions that we thought might be asked earlier today, and what I'm about to share, I did not share when we were having lunch today together.
Oh no.
She'll be the first to tell you I am not really a very romantic person, like in terms of the big romantic gestures. I think I proposed by saying something like, hey, those rings we saw, I ordered those today. That was sort of and there's more to that story, which we will not go into, but it is the least romantic story you could ever imagine. You would never put it in a book. And one of the things that I think I've really learned by reading and also writing romance is just how important romantic gestures are and can be. And so it's really made me think about that in a different way. I don't know if I've executed very well, but I'm thinking about it.
Well, and for me, I guess I went way, way back to I think it was teenage years, and that's a long time ago. And when I read Flowers in the Attic, which like I was like, wow, and I think back now on that, and just about what a risk romance can be, what a risk falling in love can be. And I think that's a kind of a thing
Are
that,
you trying to tell me something?
well, it was risky. I mean, this was, yeah. I
It
mean,
is risky.
we've been together for a very long time, and it wasn't, when we got together, it wasn't like it is today. And hopefully will become less and less risky instead of more and more in our climate today. So that was kind of what hit me, is what a risk love can be.
Yeah. I just have to say that ordering the rings is a pretty romantic thing, in my opinion.
Well,
It was romantic, except she said we had to do it so that when our son came to live with us, we were married. Not because she was deeply in love and we should, like
Okay.
actually do this.
The pragmatic part of it too, I see. I got it.
I'm very practical.
Got it. All right, Kris, wrapping up this question, any inspiration that you've taken from a romance novel, either in real life or in books or whatever?
I think romance novels and even movies kind of remind us to always to remember to bring the romance, to don't take things for granted, and to do the romantic gestures throughout the relationship. I think what Alaina was talking about, communication is key. And I think we forget that, and we read books and it's just like, this whole it could be resolved just if they'd had a conversation. And so I think just learning from that, learning by reading and how to approach different situations, I think romance novels kind of teaches us, how to behave in our real life romance instead of taking it for granted, I think.
Yeah. Let me just ask you, why do you think so many, or there are several books that I can think of that the characters don't talk to each other? Is that just a plot device, or is that something that you think could be happening in real life too?
I think it's both. I mean, if we didn't have that fear of actually having the hard talks and the hard communications, then every relationship would be perfect, and every relationship is not perfect. And I think, communication helps. It's not the answer of all answers, but I think it does help.
Yeah, Alaina, I saw you nodding. Anything to add there? That
Well,
idea of characters not talking to each other?
Yeah, I do think that some people are like that. Being communicative and sharing your not only thoughts but emotions, you're totally vulnerable. And I don't think a lot of people are comfortable with that, even when they are in a relationship. And I think that can be a realistic portrayal of someone. Granted, I wouldn't want to see it in every book. And at some point, they're going to have to share, in order for something to work.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen readers complain about that. Why can't they just talk to each other?
Yeah.
But it's so hard. I mean, having those conversations is a really difficult thing, or even just sharing the way you think about something. It's a little act of bravery.
Right.
Okay. So let me get to my next question. Oh, wait, we got one in the Q&A. Let me take a look.
Oh.
All right, so JT asks, do you write scenes just because they fit and move the plot along, or do you add scenes to your novels to intentionally put thoughts or send ideas to the readers so they take those hints from your book and implement them in their own lives? Interesting. Thank you, JT. So I think what you're asking is, do we write with the intention of sending a message to our readers? I hope that's kind of what JT is asking here. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Kelly and Tana, maybe?
I think that's a really good question. I think, for the most part, at least for us, the characters, once we sort of launch them into the world, they sort of tell their own story. And so a lot of scenes just emerge because the characters make that happen. But there are some things I think we're really intentional about inserting, when it comes, for example, to scenes that involve sexual relationships, we're like very intentional about making sure that there is consent, verbalized in those scenes and in that relationship. So We also tend to incorporate a lot of very real life issues. Like our characters in our first 3 books are set in the borderlands between Arizona and Mexico. There are a lot of, it's a microcosm of a lot of the cultural and social and economic and political issues that we're facing in the world. And we try not to overdo that, but we do, it is very realistic. And so we're raising some issues that we hope our readers will resonate with and also learn some things about. So yes and no. When we're in charge, yes. When the characters are in charge, no.
That's a great way to sum it up. Anybody else have anything to add there? Do we intentionally put things into our novels to send a message to readers?
I'll add something. Or do you want to go?
Go ahead.
I think it just really brings up something interesting about representation itself, like as LGBTQ writers, that our books aren't necessarily instruction manuals. Like, it's important that the characters are flawed and that they make poor decisions and even sometimes harmful decisions. So I would hope that people reading my book were not like, yes, this is how I'm going to act. Because they definitely, while I try to give them, good endings and like redeemable arcs, I also don't want to fall into the trap of trying to prove like, oh, gay people are good. So, their intentions are always great. Like, there's a lot of complex dynamics. And I think it's important to reflect that because that makes our representation more rich. So yeah, I'm not trying to tell the readers to implement my plot lines in their personal lives. I would recommend against it.
Okay. Great. Kris, something to add there?
I was just gonna kind of piggyback and say the one thing I do put in my books, and I think it's very important, is consent. And I believe that's Kelly and Tana brought that up, that consent is very important. And especially in the queer community. And I just feel like I'm always going to have it. It's always going to be sexy. It's not going to be, it's something I for sure put in my books every single time, just because so many books in our past haven't been that way. And I know that we grew up with movies and books that didn't really have it, like twirl the woman around and throw her against a door and kiss her and things like that. And back then it was like, oh, how romantic. And now it's like, oh my God, how creepy. And that's very like,
Right.
It is, it's true. It's like, ask permission first instead of, forgiveness second. I feel like consent is very important. And I do put that in every book.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where the trend is going. And I hope it never trends back.
Right.
Alaina, Cathy, anything to add there?
I'll go really quick. Also, I've done consent, for that reason too. And I don't necessarily set out to, make these teachable moments in my book, but I'll come across, something I'm writing and I'll add something, sometimes as a CYA or, sometimes because I don't want to see it pop up in a review later. Like one was, they were drinking and then they were, going to have sex later. And I had to make sure that, the one was not drunk enough that she could still make informed decisions. And that was clear. And so things like that. But I don't specifically set out to make a teaching book. I'm trying to tell a story, and most of the things are moving the plot forward.
Okay, good. Let's move on. I have another question for you guys. So some people may argue that romance novels too frequently show an idealized version of a relationship or a courtship or, the dating process. Do you think romance novels foster unrealistic expectations in our real life relationships? What do you think about that? Kris, let's start with you this time.
I think that most people know that they're reading a romance novel as a form of escapism. I think we're adults and we have the experience and we know that there's going to be a happy ending in our books or in the books that we read. There's going to be a happy ending, and it's all the angst ahead of it, it's going to pay off in the end. It's going to still be happy. I think that the older you get and the more life experiences and the more romances and the more relationships you have, you realize how to separate real from fiction. You know, you understand that, oh, this is a little bit above and beyond, but that's perfect. That's what my heart needs. You know, it might not be a realistic expectation, but it makes me feel good, and it makes me still believe in love and still believe in romance. And I think just having hope all the time is what we need. And I think romance novels really gives that to us, whether we're in a great relationship or we're not in a relationship at all. It tells us, you know, there's hope for keeping the relationship and there's hope for finding it. So I think romance novels will always be around, and they will always be big sellers, and they will, because we all love and we all want love. It's it's human condition, human nature. We want that.
Okay. Cathy, do you agree with Kris?
Fighting.
I think Kris's earlier point was really, that some behaviors that in the past were considered, you know, super romantic are now just out and out creepy. A lot of the kind of idea about courting or chasing is now like really like icky. So I think there have been times, I think, when romance novels and, you know, films have fostered unrealistic expectations. And I think I personally sometimes find the idea that there's a soulmate, there's the one out there. I sometimes think that creates slightly tricky expectations, if that's kind of, you know, taken wholeheartedly on board as the fact that there is like one person for you, and that once you get that happily ever after, that's it. There won't be any issues. You won't ever have to like put any effort in, put any work in. So yeah, sometimes I enjoy reading romance novels where you get that, like, they get together and then you get to see like a bit later when they maybe still having to like work at it. Because I find that bit sometimes quite romantic, the actual like having to work your relationship and keep it going, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. The romance of an already established relationship. Alaina, what are your thoughts?
I think it can be unrealistic, but not necessarily about the expectations. You know, I want to give readers some credit. Yeah, it's going to depend on the person, but it is fiction. And I don't think it's necessarily unrealistic to depict fanciful, romantic, you know, meet cutes or whatever. You know, when my partner and I met and got together, it was very romantic, and that does happen. And obviously, not everything is going to translate into, you know, what real life looks like, because when we write a romance novel, we're taking a snapshot of a time, you know, from when they meet to the HEA or the HFN, or, you know, when they decide to go on their journey of life together.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that tends to be a kind of rosy time in a relationship compared to, you know, some of the mundane things boring things that go on, you know, often in our lives for most of the time. But like I think Kris said, it's a form of escapism.
Yeah. That, speaking of the meet cute, I was reading that there is a thing now called the meet ugly, which is, I guess, just what it sounds like. I'd like to see that. Tana and Kelly, what do you think?
I think, you know, it's one of the things that we really try to balance, I guess, in our writing, is that hopeful, joyful, kind of exuberance with the reality of struggle and the imperfect. So yes, I guess would be my answer to that. Sometimes I think we can get really caught up in the idealism of a romance, but you know, there's got to be that struggle moment too, you know, where are they going to get together? And so just to balance the realities of love with the messiness of life. And so trying to do both those things to ultimately give people hope that love is attainable and there are happily ever afters. That doesn't mean perfection. And so trying to walk that balance is, I think, married to a practical person and somebody very grounded in the day to day. I think we find fun in that.
Well, and I would just add very quickly, just because something isn't real, just because it's fiction, doesn't mean it's not true. And there's so much truth, I think, in romance novels. There's so much true about the power of love to really transport you and transform you. And those moments, I think romance novels have the potential of opening up our eyes to those moments in the mundane and in the everyday, and in whatever comes after the happy ever after ending. So just because it's fiction, just because it's not real, doesn't mean that there isn't truth here.
She is a romantic.
Yeah, I can definitely tell. It's there, shining through. Elizabeth, anything to add about unrealistic expectations?
Yeah, I totally agree with what everyone has said. I think there's kind of two different ends of the spectrum. Like, one is the more escapist or aspirational. And I think that, like Kelly was saying, that's really important, because if we can't use our imaginations to think about, what do we want, and have something to kind of copy after or romanticize our own lives, then we can kind of get too caught up in the realism. And then the other end of the spectrum is the more kind of gritty fiction that's a little bit more reflective rather than escapist. So I think it's just important to know which kind of tone you're reading and keep that in mind, as far as, like, are you wanting something that reflects your experience in however, maybe dark and real that may be, or are you wanting something that, like, uplifts you and makes you something to kind of aspire for? And both have their in fiction.
If I could just respond to what you just said, Elizabeth, I love that language that you just used, aspirational as opposed to escapist, right? I'm going to hang on to that. That's helpful.
That is really good. Let me ask you, Elizabeth, your book that's coming out, Good Christian Girls, where do you think it falls?
It is not aspirational. It is more, and which I think is I love reading romance novels that are that way. But for me, I was like trying to dig. I mean, I think we all do this, but I was trying to dig into my own experience, obviously from the title, like the being queer and growing up religious, like can be at odds with each other. They don't have to be, but often are. And I was kind of trying to dig into that through fiction. It's not, it's not autobiographical, but I did want it to be more reflective than aspirational, and say, because I guess my thought was, that saying of be who you needed when you were younger. I was like, man, if I had read this like YA romance novel when I was younger, and I had some kind of framework to understand a different perspective, that would have been life-changing. So let me write what I wish kind of I had. So it's not, it's still fun. It takes place at camp. But I wouldn't try to copy anything that happens in it.
So, Kris, let me put that question to you. So, Dreamer, more aspirational or reflective, do you think?
Probably more reflective. I can't talk about it.
Okay. Reflective.
Reflective.
Stay here first.
Intrigue.
Anybody else want to chime in on their new release? Alaina, how about you? Reflective, aspirational?
Yeah, I was just, when Kris said that, I was trying to think, and I probably somewhere in the middle. I guess it probably has aspects of both.
Cathy, any want to weigh in?
I think my latest release definitely falls on the reflective end of things. Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Spirits and Sirens, how about that one, Kelly and Tana?
All three of our books set in Owen Station, again, there are very realistic themes, very contemporary realistic themes, but they're all aspirational. They all present in some ways a vision of what we hope what community could be, relationships could be, and the world could be. So it even goes beyond just the relationship. It's really in some ways a utopic view of what community could be.
Mhm. I think that's a really interesting metric to apply to our books when we're discussing it. So thanks for that, Elizabeth.
That kind of makes me think, sorry, I just want to add one little thing.
Yeah, sure.
I'm also a huge TV nerd, and that kind of makes me think of Schitt's Creek and how they made the decision in that to kind of not include homophobia in that world and to make it like a really positive aspirational thing. And that representation was so important for a lot of people. So books like that are just so important. So
Yeah, I may have some mean parents in my books, but they're never going to be unaccepting parents. All of my parents are going to be accepting of their children. So yeah, I think that we can do that in our writing too.
Nan, this would be a good time for you to share what your books are that you're proud of these days.
Well, no, this is about you guys. I'm going to panel tomorrow, so if you are interested, you can watch me tomorrow. I'll talk a lot about my book. I'm also doing a reading about it tomorrow at noon, so you can catch me there. I am actually very interested in talking about sex right now. So we talked about consent. So besides consent, what can romance novels teach us about sex for our real life stuff happening? Anybody want to go first?
I'll go first.
All right, thank you.
We were talking about this a little earlier, and I think beyond consent, communication. So often in real life, you get caught in a moment, and you don't want things to be awkward, or I think romance novels can tell us or show us ways to communicate to have a better sex life. I read for research tons of advice columns because they're always ripe with wonderful problems to be solved. And now I've got my notebook out, and this would be fun to write about. But so often the sexual problems that people have are in relationship specifically are around communication. And, I'd like to have this, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if my partner would want to do that. Well, the best way, I think, to find those things out is to have a conversation instead of just wondering and then not having that very personal, full part of the relationship suffer because you're too afraid to have a conversation about it.
Well, and sort of build on that, in TV and movies, not only do we not see very many, we don't see much sex between in sapphic relationships and on TV and the movies, but no matter who we're watching, there's not a lot of words. Like, there's hardly ever any words, and that's one of the beautiful things about a romance novel is there are lots of words.
True, absolutely true. And I am guilty of having very chatty people in my sex scenes. Cathy, what do you think? What can romance novels teach us about sex?
I think they can teach us all the infinite variety that there is in ways to have sex. I mean, I've certainly read some novels. I've been like, is that a thing? I didn't know that was a thing. So, very educational. But I think also they can sort of depict relationships where like maybe the sex isn't the main like driver of the relationship. Maybe there's something else. Maybe the initial attraction isn't based on a sexual attraction, it's based on something else. And I really enjoy, I think, reading about just the kind of different ways that people find their love and kind of work their love out. And sometimes can be very sexual, and sometimes it isn't, and it's all still like part of the kind of the romance that we enjoy reading about.
Kris, I know you write books that have a lot of sex in them.
Yes,
what do you
I do.
think about this?
Well, I think we've hit quite a bit. We talked about, communication, and then reading books that you're like, oh, I didn't know that existed, or that we could do that. Like, can we do that? And then it kind of like, the more you read, the more you know. So the more books you read and the more like spicy scenes you read, it's kind of like, well, maybe I can incorporate that into my relationship now. And I love how sex positive our books are. It's not a dirty thing. It's not something bad. Sex is a very fulfilling, very nice, just part of a relationship. And I love that we allow our characters, regardless of how flawed they are, they get to have the love, they get to have, the sex that they want, or the partner that they want to have these sexual encounters with. So I just love everything about that sex has in romance books that gives us the readers, and that we can give the readers as well as the writers.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's definitely true. Alaina, anything to add?
Well, we touched on it before, but I think, the consent thing, especially, I think in the last few years has really kind of blossomed, and you see it more and more. And I think that a lot of readers could potentially learn from that. And I think too, we could learn to have a lot more makeup sex after we fight, because that seems to be a thing in a lot of the books. And I think too, though, we need to learn that those are idealized versions a lot of times. For instance, a book that has a character who is having a period, it tends to be like a book unicorn. So we have to keep those things in mind as we read these novels.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Elizabeth, anything that you'd like to add?
I think you all covered it perfectly. There's not a lot of sex in my book. It's more leaning towards just the attraction and tension, since they are kind of younger. And I think writing about that can be helpful when you're writing kind of more young adult stuff, where it's like, this is kind of what this can feel like in your body, and this is how it can make you feel when you're interacting with someone. And that can be a really bewildering experience. So that's kind of what mine is focused on, especially coming from that kind of purity culture background. I think it's fun to be able to kind of play with that and talk about it in a positive way.
Yeah, definitely have to approach that from a different angle in a book like yours. Okay, so this question, I just kind of threw it out there. I'm not even sure how you guys are going to answer it, but let's give it a try. What can characters do in a romance that people can't do in real life? And what can people do in real life that characters can't do in a romance? Anybody want to give this one a shot? Shall I call on somebody? How about Kelly? Sorry, go ahead, Alaina.
Oh, one thing I was thinking of is sometimes I'll notice when I'm reading that there's like a heated argument going on, and one of the characters will have like just a really long paragraph where she goes off, or maybe like a couple paragraphs. And I'm like, when I'm arguing, I never get that many words in at once. So, I think we can do that in a book where we can't do that in real life.
You're so articulate when you're angry. Yeah, true. Kelly and Tana, anything?
I think one of the things that can happen in a romance novel that doesn't often happen in real life is that everything is just so truncated, happens so fast. You go from the meet cute to, oh my gosh, I'm going to love you for forever. And I mean, I know that does happen sometimes, but I think the thing that we can have in real life that isn't necessarily true in a romance novel is we can take our time.
It took us 12 years.
Yeah.
So
and
that would not fly in a romance novel.
book 10, and then
Or you can have a page that says 12 years later.
That's true. That's true.
Kris, anything that struck you about this question?
Not really. I mean, it's pretty much been said, so I don't really have anything more to add, sadly.
Okay. Elizabeth?
I guess the only thing I would add is that specifically for me, I switch points of view between the two characters in the romance, and in real life, you don't really get to be in both people's heads. So I think that's a really fun thing that you can do in fiction that you can't really do in real life, is get both sides of the story.
And I'm so glad it's such a done thing in romance, because I love having both characters' point of view. I
Me
love
too.
having that. Yeah, good point. Cathy, anything to add?
I'm always really baffled in kind of romance novels and movies where they do the big kind of like dramatic run through some sort of public transport hub to stop the love of their life getting. So I never understood that. I'm like, when they're at the airport, like, how have they got through security? If they had to buy a ticket to like go and stop there, I've never understood that. And I think in real life, I've never known anyone who's done that. So, but yeah, always when I read that.
Yeah, especially where I am in New York City, it's like it takes an hour and a half to get to JFK. I'm never going to catch up with you. Never.
Just call them.
Okay, well, thank you for entertaining that crazy question. This one I think is maybe a little more interesting. What would you say to people who claim romance is dead in real life?
Liars.
Tell me more, Kris. What else?
I'm just kidding. It's not dead. It isn't dead at all. I think that you just have to kind of weed through. It's part of life. You have to weed through things to find the right person, to find the right job, to find the right friends, to find the food you like. It's just a matter, it's experience, that's what it is. And it's so funny. I think it's so cute when I see like really young kids, I say young kids, but young people in love. And I'm just like, that's so sweet. And oh my gosh, are they going to be disappointed? Like, it is not going to last. Like 18, we're going to get married. Okay. All right. And then 2 months later, they're, broken up and they've moved on. I feel like,
Wait,
like
are
I said,
you a romance writer?
Right. But not at 18. I mean, we all know we thought when we were 18, we found the perfect person. And now you're just like, oh my God, what? Because we've had the experiences. We know what works for us. We know what makes our hearts beat fast. And I think that if you're just a romantic, you're always going to believe in love and you're always going to believe in romance. And you can say you're not romantic, but really you are, because you're reading and you're writing romance books. It's funny. I have a writer friend who absolutely like tells me all the time, I have to write romance. I just don't want to. I want to stick with what I'm writing. And she'll write a romance book and it'll sell well. And I'm like, see, I told you, people love romance. They love the whole idea of love. And I think that will always be around. It always has been around. I don't think it's going anywhere, and I don't think it's dead.
Okay.
We don't really understand. I don't really understand the question. Or the state, when people say romance is dead, what does that mean?
Yeah. To me, it means that people are not finding in their lives, they are not finding people or situations where they derive their happiness from ideas of love.
Okay. Liars.
See? Liars.
Elizabeth.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Tana. Something.
Well, I also think that, I mean, going back to the question, is this ideal? Is romance writing idealized? And I think romance, if we understand that romance looks all kinds of ways in all kinds of situations, then we don't miss out on all those little moments. We dance in the kitchen. That's a moment. And we could just brush that off and go, oh, that was just another goofy moment, instead of that was just a little bit of love that we got in that specific time. And so my question would be, are people open to romance?
Yeah.
And that's a different thing, I think. And
if so,
it may
what prevents them
no
from-
longer feel that it's dead.
Okay, cool. Anything to add, Elizabeth?
I agree with what you all said. I think you have to be the romance you want to see in the world. And when people say romance is dead, it's like you get back what you put out, and you can be that romance. It has to come from within. So if you want their romance to not be dead, you have to do the work. It takes being present and actually taking the time to pause and have those moments. And I understand that what people are saying, kind of, now it's all social media, now it's all, these kinds of things. But I think that if you can let romance not be dead for you if you're committed to it.
Anything to add, Cathy?
Yeah, I think romance kind of it can evolve, it can change. It isn't one set of ideas that remains forever. And what, I think, as Elizabeth says, what you find romantic, as long as it comes from you genuinely, then absolutely romance isn't dead. It's gonna outlive us all.
Let's hope so. Alaina, last word on this one.
Yeah, I think maybe comparing, your personal life to a romance novel is a bit unfair. Like I said before, it's a snapshot in time and it's a small sample size. And I looked up the word romanticize before just to kind of prepare myself. And, it describes it as an idealism, often in order to make something more appealing. And we are, entertaining readers to some extent. And we're trying to shove in as many little romantic moments in these novels as possible. So keep that in mind. It might be a losing game if you don't, because you're looking at a certain part of life, and your life is much bigger than that.
True, absolutely true. Just to point out, JT in the chat said, just because the romantic idea of love hasn't happened to someone doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And then she added, "we." So thank you, JT, or they, sorry. Okay, here's a question that's, I didn't give you guys beforehand, but is there anything that the romance genre isn't giving people that they need to have? I don't know if that's even something that we can answer, but maybe we could brainstorm it a little bit. Is there something that romance needs to provide that you think it currently maybe isn't?
Well, I would have to say visibility. I think, we're all writing these books, and sometimes, you wonder how many people are seeing them. For instance, I was in Provincetown for Women's Week, and there were 6 Sapphic women in the house next to us, and none of them ever read a Sapphic romance book, didn't know what Bold Strokes Books was, didn't know there was a book event going on along with Women's Week. And that kind of makes me sad. I wish there was a way that we could get what we are doing out there to more people who would like and possibly need it.
Yeah, good answer.
Great,
and
yeah.
right off the cuff, which I commend you for. What about our audiences? Are there aspects of people's experiences that we need to be showing better? In particular, I'm thinking of, differently abled people maybe, or I'm not sure. What is it that we can be doing better in romance to maybe reflect reality a little more?
Representation, and I say that very gently, because I think it's a difficult line to walk, making sure that there's representation without co-opting someone's voice. And yet I personally don't want to read books that are just about able-bodied white people. That's not very interesting to me. It's also not reflective of the world that I live in. So trying to figure out how to navigate those waters and do it respectfully, so that our worlds are bigger and fuller, but yeah, treading lightly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you.
Because the ideal situation would be to hear people telling their stories in their own voices. And so having more writers of color, more writers representative of a variety of different
abilities,
right.
Yeah.
But also, not having so many worlds that all look and feel the same.
And feeling like no matter who that person is writing, I don't necessarily want a homogenous landscape, whoever that writer is.
Right.
Yes.
So
there's a comment.
To do that.
sorry. A comment from Raven McDaniel, sympathy readers and active outreach to writers who are part of groups who are not well represented. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we are almost out of time, but I want to just do a whip around, have everybody mention their book one more time, maybe give us like a 1-sentence log line to tell people what it's about and get them excited for it. Let's start with Cathy.
Sorry, it's finding my unmute button. Yes, my new release is a Turning Point, which is a contemporary romance, which is out on the 1st of Feb.
And what's it about?
It's about Asha, who has to return to her hometown following the illness of her dad, and while she's kind of working through all of that, she reconnects with Jodie, who she was at school with, and they were not friends at school. And that's how they kind of like get to know each other again under these very difficult circumstances.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you. Kris.
My latest release that comes out, or that is out now, January 1st, and then wide release on the 16th, is Dreamer, and it is a small town romance where Sawyer O'Neill coasts into town because her electric car runs out of juice, and she's in a small town and has no way to charge it. So it's just a small town romance, and has a lot of twists and turns, and I hope you enjoy it.
Nice. Small town romance with a modern twist.
Yes.
Great. Tana and Kelly?
Our most recent book is Whiskey and Wine. It's set in a fictional small town in the mountains of southern Arizona, right in the borderlands. Very diverse community there. Lace owns the adult toy shop in town, and Tessa is a winemaker, and it's a friends to lovers, and it's sweet and beautiful, and probably contains more of our story than the other two that we've written. So it's closest to my heart. We really love it. And the next book is coming out in April, Spirits and Sirens, set in that same town.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Elizabeth.
Yeah, my book is right here. It's called Good Christian Girls, and it is about 2 girls at a Christian summer camp who go on some adventures and may or may not fall in love with each other. And it comes out 1 month from today. Yay.
I vote for having them fall in love with each other.
Same.
Me too.
You'll have to read it and find out.
I will. Alaina.
My new release, All Things Beautiful, is out now through Bold Strokes and comes out on the 16th through all other outlets. And it's about a student and teacher who fall for each other in a New York atelier, which is an art school.
That sounds great. I love the art aspect. Okay, I think we are out of time, and I want to thank the panelists for entertaining.
Did we get Cathy's book?
Sorry?
Did we get Cathy's book?
We did.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Cathy.
No worries. We got everybody, right? I think so. And thanks everybody for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our programming. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.